Okay, so yeah, I'm Seán Mac Brádaigh. I work for PPR, supporting a number of different human rights-based campaigns led by communities around mental health, asylum and housing. And we'll have the great pleasure to have Dr. Elizabeth DeYoung here today to talk us through some of her experiences. Yes, woohoo indeed. To, in a nutshell, talk us through how she ended up in this neck of the woods and what she's saying about it. So we are going to get into it, and we're going to be, I think, about an hour here, and then Fergal will put the shepherd's crook around my neck and whisk us off to start the next talk. So without further ado, we're going to get into Liz giving us a bit of an understanding of how she came to be in this space. Agus toime bommachiti Leabhair Kainchliv, Agus the Gaelic Jaspin Bacht Lefa Egg Liz Comay. So with your best Boston accent is gonna give us a bit of a taste of the work. Liz DeYoung is just to give you all the accolades, has a PhD at the Institute of Irish Studies, the University of Liverpool, focusing on post-conflict studies in the 6 counties, but is also enmeshed in universal basic income work in Pennsylvania, so is very well versed and very well understood on a lot of different social and economic issues that impact on the campaigning that we're involved in the city today. So gan Pomchella, Liz, sin gushin do make Murrow usage make Marty shouts at us because we don't get the audio.
Okay. Michael? Okay. Thank you so much, Sean. Gurmil Maiget. Thank you so much to the organizers for inviting me to be a part of this conversation today. Bhaile Mara, Míle Buíochas agus Bula Bás, Faoin Daoine ag Eagrú, and Scoil Gheimhridh Culturlan, PPR, Daoine Eile. It's more an honour due of Éan Shaw living you. So Bhaile piece of bug, Ara a Scoil Gheimhridh Dús, Bí Fuí Jaclam, Tamayacha Folam, Gianni Mimi Ihil, agus Bé Muid Kent Jamera Níos Mulia, Fuí Macij Taija. So a couple of other dús. I'll be speaking in Irish and then moving into English. So Camahan, Scailbeg, Fui Misha, Agus Michiel and Shawmiel first, Blainty Ohen, Gittabug Cohex, Camada, Alice Fui, Nabarak Girdwood, Adish Cartbell first, Agus Camatri, Wyam Lorch Fui, Nagriwi Pobal, Ag Tridge, Van the Carta daonna, Agus Aganam Kiana, Aaron Tivella, Na Napalachor, Stormont, Ag Tridge Lahela. So, on Headla, gus Mamel Firsta, be make shul. Suas and Woher, Gashis, Heart, Ahan Canter, O Boher Shankil, Gaji Sailor Town, O Alskil Banrian, Gaji Common Clunard, August Culturlan, or Fud na Haich, either Yahiv than Balamori or Balamora, August than Fubble. August Bumila, a Haithman Tom and Thraj. Agus bhí mór an sim agam na ruddy bug an tlí, na murwashu, graffiti, na shoppy, na ferniu, agus an atmosphere diffrúil sa aithne cantar. Agus láháin bhí mé calcha, Mosca Suas, agsúil a dúscart bell firstra, agus ní ro alles agam faoi an cantar ag an am sin, agus ní ro Google Maps, Maguhan agam sin, Shum ní ro guhan agam sin. So Hannig me wool me le Balamor, agus ní ro me abalta a trasnu, agus Hannig me the hirch, Hannig marl ní ro fa bí leis an Balamor an cantar sin. Bhí sé aisteach. Agus first níos muilja go bhfuil sé an balla Barrack Girdwood. Agus cadjas faoi sin. Dúirhin go bhfuil sin an am ar bunny Macij Taija. Haith mé hartfa sé bléin ag staidir sa Barrack, ag staidir ar star na scéal, ag lort lena griwi pobl, hart an Barrack, agus cajwar am a caihulau, hart na blénta. Agus dólam mé go bhfuil cajwar talú fáú an sa ceantar, agus bí géir céim tíhiachta an. Ach níor hug an rialtas go leor tithe. Nuair hannig mé sa Barrack, is an tíhiacht agus an talú an crowd Spartania is mó sa Girdwood. Agus nuair hannig mé an sin, an céadam, bhí séad demilitarized. Bhí an siú fáliú. Agus agam sin, níl shade na pálatóirí a géirí tithe a hógail. Ach bhí acu tithe a hógail, mar ba chóir agus mar tumulta, bhí galore, taide ag teacht leis ag gantanas mór tithe sa ceantar. Ach in dhé míle agus míle font, thug shade anad pobail agus park imethe fiche agus 7 acres. So, thug shade ach seasca tithe, agus sin an rud is tábhailtí den Scoil Gheimhridh, seasca tithe agus bhí agus bíon like míle agus míle daoine an lista tithe. So cé a tharla. Bhí na pálatóir ag trid faoi a thugín an siú barric. Ag an am sin bhí athrú demographic I dúis cart Belfastra, agus bhí an DUP a géirí gram a chonneal an cantar. Mar sin chuir siad bach na tithe mar bhí siad ag smaointiú, níos mó tithe, níos mó votes, nationalist, no Catholic, really gerrymandering a bhí an darlamsa. Agus tháinig muid fása an tainias faoi na tithiachta idir an DUP agus Sinn Féin. An tainias faoi críthe agus féinnealacht is ceann seachar lena fáib. An díreú, bhí acu na pálatóir tithe a ail den pobail, scríb sé é síos a Good Friday Agreement, ach ní gríhí sé de réir, thir séad an seansa mú, agus is mór an éigear é. Agus ní féidir éilú ó scéal na tithiachta in seo I dúis cart go generalta. Tá fáib na daonna tithiachta in seo go fóil. Agus sílam an rud is tábhailtí a rá nach bhfuil an choras tithiachta fríde chéile ó bun go bhar, go bhfuil siad dúrtha ní han tarbha iad siúd talóraigh tithe ach chun amíocht fa críthe agus acquaní. Agus an sin hun brabús fásta ar nói sin an doan faoi capitalism, capitalachas. So inis tá daithe a chathair beidir míle daoine an lista tithe, agus tá mór an aib daoine. Tá siad spleach, níl an hinseach acu, tá siad glasáilte amach as an gaidan síl mar sin. Agus bhí seans an le Gheimhridh, ach bhí seans an leis an rialtas ach hep orthú a lig. Agus bhí seans an leis an rialtas in an Good Friday Agreement, ach ní próses cinseachta sa túiscart bunithe réachtaíocht nó idil an próses siochan, ach bunithe faoi críocha agus cibhlint cúiachta. Agus an díreú, thur an rialtas an seans a mú, rialtas atá taris clisiú. Chur an DUP bach na tithe, agus an sin ach na Gaeilge, agus inis an protocol. Agus tá na daoine a lig Malta go mór an rialtas inis, dar lamsa. Ach, tána gríoachtas pobail ag aber leis an phobal agus tá cuma saolaíocht acu, cuma nuala, tá siad abalta smaointiú as an nua. Ag fecin ar rudí a bhealach uair. Agus fecin muid aniu leis an Scoil Gheimhridh, tá fan mór fólama ar na gríomhaí pobail, agus iad a géirí chuir dúisealnach le insin oscailte. Agus tá ag súil go mór leis a bheith an seo agus ag súil go mór leis an chora aniu. So, gur míle.
This is an oscailt sin. So for Majahamra, we got everything from the sectarian state through international capitalism, profits, landlordism, Good Friday Agreement, abdication of Section 75, and right up in about 5 minutes in Irish from a woman from Boston. Did Marty get that on camera all right? Did Marty record that okay? So we're going to try and unpack a bit of it here over the next wee while. The book itself, I've read the book and I have to say it's dynamite research. It's cross-reference every possible source you can imagine. It's about frontline conversations, backroom conversations, existing research, Hansard, it's the whole bit and bob. And for us as housing campaigners who've been sort of walking through the journey of interacting with the state for the last 15 years or so, organising homeless families at that hard end to take on authorities and to push for equal rights within housing and to dismantle the sectarian underbelly of the housing system of our state. it is a pleasure to see such credible research in the public domain. And we want to unpack a wee bit about it now. Want to maybe get into it a bit more than what you just done there, which is fantastic. So if you can give us, Liz, and give us a bit of a sense of, you spoke there about how you found yourself in Belfast. You're walking around, you walk into this enormous 40-foot structure, demarcating territory, and then from there, what happened next? What did you explore in this book? What did you explore on your journey, and what are the findings that come out as you walked around these districts and spoke to the people in these areas?
Yeah, so as many of you know, I really started getting to know Belfast through walking, and it was literally through getting lost and running into the barracks that I first encountered them. And I just couldn't figure out what this huge patch of land was doing here. And I just started knocking on, doors of community groups, asking people what they knew about the barracks. And some of you might already know a bit about the site, but for those who don't, just a little bit of context. This is a patch of land. It's about 27 acres, and that includes some of the Crumlin Road jail site as well. During the conflict, the Girdwood Barracks were the main army barracks in North Belfast. And they're a really contentious location because they essentially form this buffer zone between four pretty segregated neighborhoods. You have on one side the New Lodge and the Lower Shankill, and then on the other side you have the Lower Cliftonville and the Lower Old Park. So it's always been really contested land, militarized land. I think it's important to note too that although those neighborhoods are segregated, they have a lot in common. North Belfast has experienced consistent mental health crises, the housing crisis that we'll talk about today, disinvestment. And so back in the wake of the Good Friday Agreement, this Girdwood Barracks site, it was demilitarized and this huge parcel of land became available. And it was really an enormous opportunity. People were talking about this land as an internationally significant chance to invest in an area that really needed it and to encourage transformation and peace building. There's a lot of optimism around the site. And of course, this is again 27 acres. And so it was really a chance to address what even back then was a major housing crisis in North Belfast. So really, really high hopes for Girdwood all around in the wake of the peace process.
And the high hopes.
Yeah.
End up. So we're sitting with 27 acres. We're sitting with probably the most progressive legislation written into a peace document that, well, at least that's what Northern Ireland PLC are selling it as. We have widespread religious inequality in housing, poverty, abject poverty around the site. What happens next?
Yeah, so it didn't happen. The vision for the site really fell victim to sectarian squabbles between, namely the DUP and Sinn Féin. It took 11 years of dysfunction, and at the political and the community level, and almost £11.7 million of Peace 3 funding actually. And the politicians eventually agreed on a plan for the site. And today, if you go to the Girdwood Barracks site, there's a leisure center, the Girdwood Community Hub. There's playing fields in a neighborhood that they already had a critical mass of both of those things. It doesn't really make sense that that's how the site was used. And it's just a real white elephant of a development. It doesn't do much for the surrounding area. It's not really used by the surrounding area in terms of targeted resources, in terms of the potential that the site initially offered. It really only inscribes the physical divisions that were already present. And skeptics level, myself included, that the final plan for the site was really just a shared out zero-sum kind of tit for tat compromise where the politicians carved up the site rather than having a meaningful regeneration. Yeah.
And you've said in your book countless times and in the interviews about it that it serves essentially for your analysis anyway as a microcosm of the entire peace process of everybody, probably everyone in this room will have some sense of the dysfunctionality of our political institutions, public authorities. I don't know how many hiatus storments we've had, I mean, certainly our experience has been you can get as much progress when it's down as when it's up, you know what I mean? Can you give us a bit of a sense of what do you mean by that, it being a microcosm for the peace process itself?
Yeah, I think, Girdwood, I'm like a detail-oriented person. So I did this case study, of this one site, but it really is such an allegory for what happened at the political level and really for the dynamics that brought us to where we are now. And there's a couple different things there. I mean, the thing that you really can't escape is the housing issue. That, according to the peace process and according to the legislation that followed, there had to be equality of opportunity. And this is something that PPR, has done a lot of work around. This idea of Section 75 of the Act, ensuring that everybody would have access to the resources they needed. And that was just completely ignored at Girdwood. Like, there was no equality impact assessment. There was just really good work being done on the ground by PPR and by, community groups saying, this area needs housing, and that was just completely ignored at the political level. So that's one thing, and I think in a broader sense, the dealings around Girdwood, they show just some uncomfortable truths about how the power-sharing government ended up unfolding, which was this really strange relationship between the two main political parties, where the DUP would often be really intransigent on issues, and Sinn Féin would kind of, keep the institutions afloat. We'll play the long game here. But the result is that there was so much, so many backroom dealings and so many things that didn't end up happening for people on the ground. And the result is, Girdwood, I'd say it's a failure, because I think that, at one point it was supposed to be North Belfast's biggest regeneration project. And the thing I hear from people is like, it's better than nothing. And is that the epithet that like we really want for and I think, I mean, it failed in a lot of ways. And I think those dynamics I talked about between the DUP and Sinn Féin eventually brought the assembly down. Eventually the assembly ran out of road, it failed. And I think, particularly the DUP's intransigence around the issue of housing is echoed in their intransigence on other issues that have collapsed the assembly, like the Irish Language Act, like, the current protocol. It all just feels like a mirror of what happened to Girdwood. Yeah.
Okay. We're going to open up shortly for Fleur. You're late? Yeah, sit down. You're late. You're going to get punished for being late. We're going to open up shortly for a few questions from the floor. I'm just trying to check the time too. But one thing I wanted to try and get a bit of sense from, because we're sitting here amongst housing campaigners and activists and maybe housing providers and people who are interested in that very specific. And it sometimes seems niche, but for me it's everything. You're talking about a new Ireland. You're talking about who's it for? Who are we building it for? Who's going to live safely in this new Ireland that's being articulated and is emerging before our eyes? So home is just the centre point of it all for me, and the activism that we've been involved in. For me, I've always sort of reflected like that on it, particularly when new populations coming here and the whole far right dynamic that's emerging, essentially blaming refugees for every problem that our political institutions have created and exacerbated in our economic reality. So wanted to try and get a wee bit of a sense of unpacking, and some of the stuff you're saying like really resonates with the human rights standards. In our experience, have become a matter of negotiation, not a matter of fact. You know what I mean? Yeah. Human rights principles that were embedded into the Good Friday Agreement and international standards and local standards are actually a matter of negotiation, not a matter of fact. And they're supposed to be a matter of fact. They're supposed to be a duty on public authorities to be executed without fear or favour. What they are in reality is a negotiation, and a constant negotiation dependent on power. So we have to build power, and we do that by organising communities. But what would your sense be? And you know how we've transitioned maybe through Girdwood, Hillview, the Mackey's site. The same game keeps playing out. I mean, you can maybe go back to Forest Partition. So the same game keeps playing out around politics, power and territory. What would your reflections be or lessons be to draw from the Girdwood situation for where we are now in this city and where we are now in this society and on this island? Big cosmic one there for you, Liz, that's off.
I mean, it is hard to say, because it's like at the minute it feels like there's no accountability at a political level. But I would say, just like don't let what happened at Girdwood happen at Mackey's. You know, Mackey's to me feels, it's the legacy of Girdwood in a lot of ways. This is a site that PPR is currently organizing around, right? A lot of the same things that were happening at Girdwood are happening there. You know, some of the things that really stand out to me about Girdwood was just at no point in the development process was there any kind of input from a community level. Like, you know, there were multiple phases of this development process, and they were all excruciating. And, you know, I think at the time, PPR, and this was something, you know, I found really, I loved coming across PPR's work in my research, because at the time, they were really one of the only voices that were holding the government to account and saying, like, you know, what are you doing here at Girdwood, and how is it reflecting the promises of the peace process? But all that work was ignored. All that work was ignored on the community level. You know, and there were so many missed opportunities as a result, because you didn't have this targeted process where you were looking at, like, how can the site best benefit the people around it? And that, you know, in the book, I go through, there were so many missed opportunities, just so many, like, ridiculous, I don't know, kind of things that ensued with the council and with community groups. So, you know, seeing that was really frustrating, just not having that community input there. The other thing I would say, because I couldn't quite decide where I fit research-wise, like, you know, I was technically Irish studies, you know, but I did some geography, I did a little bit of, like, urban planning, and just as a site, it's kind of a disaster. Like, if you look at it purely from a planning perspective, the Girdwood site, you've got, like, a leisure center plunked into the middle of, like, this huge field, and then you've got 60 houses towards the back. And those houses, like, aren't near services, or there's not even a playground, you know what I mean? There's nothing there for the people that live there. And at the time, actually, in North Belfast, there was regeneration going on next to, like, right next door, there was the Crumlin Road Jail happening. There were multiple regeneration schemes going on in Lower Old Park and the York Street interchange, and none of that was really woven together. These were all really piecemeal redevelopment schemes in the neighborhood. And what could have happened had they, you know, done a bigger picture plan to see, like, you know, how can we make North Belfast a series of neighborhoods that fits together and stitches things together. Like, that was a missed opportunity as well, I think. And I think with the Mackey site, you know, I'd like to hear a little bit from you, Seán, about how it feels like there's a plan there that makes sense for the area more broadly. I don't know.
So I'm going to write a book. And, in about 5 minutes here, go on the lunch break, and then you can come interview me about it. What about
I want to hear about it.
I mean, yeah, your reflections are accurate. We definitely learned a lot from the Girdwood experience. The Girdwood experience gave birth to the Equality Can't Wait campaign, led by homeless women living in the hostel at the bottom of the New Lodge flats. So, and what they were saying when they were saying Equality Can't Wait was, and it wasn't just Sinn Féin and DUP in the end that presented the Girdwood deal. It was the other political parties, SDLP, Alliance, Greens. They were all in the photograph thing. When that photo went out, and those women in that hostel were going, like, I've been on a waiting list for 26 months and living in a hostel at the bottom of a block of flats that were built in the 50s and are falling down around me. There's literal shit coming up through the sinks. There's pigeon shit all over the landings. The kids can't breathe. The damp and the mould is intoxicating their lungs. But they're presenting the Girdwood deal to me as here it's better than nothing, isn't it? And they're going, look, Equality Can't Wait. This legislation that you promised us in 1998 and enacted into law that said you would tackle religious discrimination through implementing equality provisions, it can't wait till your politics is comfortable with my homelessness. And that was the point of the campaign. And it was launched and it started mapping out land all over the city. In 4 out of 5 of those big sites, homes are now being developed. The Glenmona site, the Harbour, Hillview, and what was the other one, McMagan? Mackey's aren't on that yet. We'll get them sorted.
What do you think?
The Sirocco. But every time we've seen, like, housing even develop on that, what happened was we would leverage enough political sort of momentum to build homes, but what would happen, our housing model would kick in, which is 50-50 borrowing, and basically low-cost housing being developed that maybe doesn't last. So we're now dealing with the next generation of poor housing that was thrown up maybe 20, 15 years ago, that's now fallen down again. So there's deep problems in the whole apparatus, from its profit margins to its impetus. And what we have now is less than 1,000 units a year have been turned out for the last 15 years, and it hasn't mattered who has been in power. It doesn't matter whether it was Nelson McCausland or Deirdre Hargey, and I know Deirdre Hargey and respect her. I don't know Nelson McCausland and I don't respect him, but the reality of the housing delivery is less than 1,000 units a year from 22 housing associations for 15 years, and it's because essentially the status quo is comfortable with the current system. There's no one pushing for that target to go up. So what those families and those homeless women in the 9 hostels around the Mackie site are doing at the present is pushing for an entirely new plan, community-led, to deliver the kind of housing that people deserve and that will accommodate the multicultural society, non-sectarian society that we're trying to build in the future. So, I mean, big up them and bully bus for them all. So thanks for asking me about the book that Marissa's going to write. And so we're going to open up, I think with a few minutes, we're going to open up, if anyone has any questions for Liz, to pop a few out. Probably do the hands and then take them all and then just handle it like that. So there's...
Sean, they have to use the mic though.
And people have to use this mic, so I'll bring it. So I think just take them all. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If you just want to just posit your stuff out, and if we can get answering it, we will. Got Lord Brendan, come up with that.
Okay, just to introduce Maga first, as a chorus, in case you didn't touch. That's it. Great conversation. Thank you both for that and for all the work behind it. There's a lot of big issues that the other questions might get into as well. But I want to ask quickly, just in terms of this case study and Girdwood itself. I mean, did you look at how the site, the hub, is being used? I mean, would you consider it to be a failure in terms of what it's meant to be doing, in terms of provision in the area and so on? I mean, is that something you looked at? Because I've been there 3 times in homework, and it seems, it does seem a bit of a waste time a lot of the time. But just from your research, maybe did you look at the hub, as the case study in terms of, did it work out the way they said, the one that they...
So we'll take them all. So we'll take them all and then we'll come back on them.
Hey guys, there's actually following up on that point made about the use of garbage. I grew up by stone throw away how big your stone is from garbage, and I was always we had our carriage and whatnot against that big wall and the yellow wire and all those. But no, like in terms of what it's turned into, I mean certainly there's certainly a lot more housing built there and what it was marked for. But I think the idea that it's no use now doesn't really match up to where I've experienced it. Like I worked there last year with a group of young people from Road Park, New Lodge and Antrim Road, and I couldn't believe how busy the centre was with the use space, the pitches that we're using now. Obviously, again, it was earmarked for housing, but all the local soccer provision. There's no Gaelic because the Gaelic teams are struggling, but they're all back pushing these pitches in an area where there was high demand for space. As you all know, like I usually over the housing brief more than I am, but like where we grew up, there was no green spaces, there was no pitches. We used the Seán Mac if you got a slot in Seán Mac for playing Gaelic and whatnot. So when you're saying that it's a failure and I don't see it or there's not being used, I go up and I work on it and I want the gym's flooded, the youth space flooded. There's constant either drama or art schools in the read rooms and the big halls. The pitches are constantly in use with local sports teams. So I don't know if it's a total failure. Certainly a major compromise than what it was earmarked for, no doubt about it. And the local playing park and Road Park, it's actually a wee bit of a head mount. Not that there is a park there, but it's in the Lower Road Park. Obviously, no round about. But no, I just think it won't be a total failure because when you go up there, the place is buzzing with young people, and obviously there should be more families and more houses there. But just to follow up on that point,
Come, Margaret.
Hi, I'm just wondering if you could talk a wee bit about housing based on needs and how much of an issue that is in our politics here, because I'm from North Belfast and I know that the waiting-list issue in North Belfast is very much a problem, more so in the sort of Catholic Nationalist Republican communities. And I'm just wondering, are there any examples in other parts of Belfast that are maybe single identity areas where it's working better because it's single identity and it doesn't have to be one for them, one for us?
Thank you both. I've got two questions. One is probably more for Liz.
Hold on, Robbie, you don't get two questions.
Two questions. One's probably more for Liz. You mentioned the EU, and this is EU funding was used to deliver this. Could you just expand maybe on the role of the EU in the delivery of this project? And then the second one's probably more for Seán. I mean, both of you have listed out a whole set of systemic issues, particularly around housing, Seán, and as you say, it's so central to like a life. You could get a bit overwhelmed when you look at all of those different issues and you get a bit lost. Could you summarise why you think the Mackey's campaign in particular has the possibility, in your mind anyways, to sort of cut through those systemic issues?
Okay, I think that's, oh no.
Hordes, congratulations on your book, Liz. You're some woman for one woman to take on 5 questions like this. But the question I wanted to ask was, essentially your case study brings forward truth that many would recognise, that in Northern Ireland we elect not legislators but negotiators. The kind of constant negotiation, and Earwood is a classic example of that. And I just wonder, and it could be for both of you, in terms of what do you think the vision should have been, both in terms of the process of designing that site and, you know, taking on board what people have said, that, yeah, it's not a complete disaster, but what could it have been if it had been organised in a different way?
So you can go Seán Mac, Martin?
Should I?
So, what way do you want to take a run at that?
Yeah.
Do you want to try and, go through them, and if there's anything I can add, I will.
Okay. So, Gur my give, Asta Cast. I think you make a good point, right? Like Girdwood, it's hard for me to. I want to say it's a failure because I watched the whole thing unfold over years, and like listening to being, part of my research, the way I did it was I went in, and for years I went to all the community meetings around the site, the council meetings, worked with all the community groups that had a hand in getting Girdwood off the ground, and being privy to the different visions and the different, desires around target and need in the area. Seeing the hub as it is today, it just feels so disappointing. Because there was so much momentum on the ground at the community level. And I think, personally, I always go back to Girdwood every time I'm back in Belfast. And, I was there the other day, and it feels empty to me. I know that there's a youth space. That youth space was meant to be much bigger and much more inclusive of like a variety of age groups. I think the youth space, it's good that it's being used by people and that it's a resource, but again, it's like it could have been better. This really could have been a brilliant development in so many ways, and it's faltered. I think even, the other day, someone asked me if I wanted to meet for coffee at the Girdwood Hub, and I was like, I don't think there's a cafe there. There's like an instant espresso machine. It's just, it feels empty to me. It feels like it's not terrible, but it could have been so much better. And just being able to observe that whole process and getting that access from community groups to do so, it feels disappointing to me what it's become, which is, a building and fields. And there's so much unused land out the back as well that was never developed, that was meant to be a mixed use site, and then there was no funding for that. There's all this land out the front that was supposed to be housing for the lower Old Park area, but there was no need for it, so that was never developed. And so you also have, just this unused land around the site, right, that could have been housing and is not. And so that, I think, is a disappointing legacy. I don't know if you have anything to add on that.
Failure is just a matter of how you measure success. So what is it you're measuring? What are you measuring as success? If you're measuring some of the things you talk about, you're 100%. And so once facilities are in place, we want people using them, and it's great that people are. And for people living in areas of extreme poverty, who've come through the worst conflict in the city, you want all them kids in there all the time, playing football every day of the week and all that. But that is not, it's not the measure of the potential of that site. You can't, that's not how we, certainly organising homeless families, were measuring the success of the implementation of the Good Friday Agreement and the Section 75 obligations of the state. We were measuring it in bricks and mortar and homes and real investment and long-term opportunity and targeted jobs for the long-term unemployed and lowering, dealing with mental health outcomes and dealing with all of that stuff in a way that was the strategy. The strategy instead was anything but housing, and that's what we got. We got anything but housing, and some Catholics got homes at the bottom of the site in the corner. And extrapolate that to the bigger picture, I think we have to think, what is the measure of success in building any type of new development, a community or a society? Because if the measure of success for the All Ireland project is having some form of unity and a flag and a national anthem but deep poverty, economics that are dictated by landlords, development models that are set by the richest people in the city, and outcomes that are basically designed in a room in a Belfast City Council and then filtered through a sectarian community development infrastructure, that's not success. You know what I mean? It's nowhere near this kind of success that O'Kane and others would have aspired for communities to stand up, strive and fight for to achieve. So it's your 100, I mean, once things are there, like the Greenway, £44 million invested in creating a concrete path through Belfast City, which killed 4 badger sets on the Fourth Spring part of it, and Aaron Kelly was dead upset because it's a greenway and it's meant to be. But once it's there, people like walking their dog on it, but it was anything but housing. And that's the point. It was a reinforcement of a sectarian state and a sectarian division in a state, because it didn't want to answer the question that Amanda raised: who gets the houses? Catholics, and now black people too. And people are going to have to deal with it. And that's something that this state and the infrastructure in this state and the politics of this state is not ready to deal with yet. And in fact, it's negotiating its way out of it. So I think that maybe touches on some of those points. I don't know if you did, but touch on the funding and the process of design. I think would be important to touch about that. Like, this is peace money, building the peace, and it's good to unpack how that happened and did it build the peace?
Yeah, the other thing I wanted to touch on too with your question about housing based on need. This was something that came up, in my research. The way, like you said, how do we define success? How do we define need? That became a really big issue throughout this Girdwood development process, where the definition of need that the housing authority uses and that we would understand as like an objective need for a home was challenged when the DUP was running the Department of Social Development at the time. And there was this kind of move towards let's define housing need in different ways. That, the need for investment in predominantly Protestant Unionist neighborhoods that are, going vacant, derelict, the housing quality is poor, that was commensurate, that was akin to places that didn't have homes at all and people that were, homeless. And that was, I think one of the many reasons I wrote this book was to document these kind of things that were happening in the political sphere that were completely inappropriate, completely unjust, and just haven't been written down. Like, if nothing else, I wanted to document that this kind of, the skewing of what does housing need mean was happening, because, the result at Girdwood during that time period was that, there was a lot of investment in social housing in predominantly Protestant Unionist neighborhoods, and Girdwood, for instance, was taken off the social housing agenda. So, that issue of what does need mean, I find, equal parts interesting and upsetting in this research, and I think the idea was that if people need social housing and there's a demonstrated objective, housing waiting list, then you should build homes for people. And that didn't happen, at Girdwood.
Yeah. It would be, the funding thing is a really critical one. I wouldn't mind spending a wee minute on that before. Well, could you remember how much done Amundsen that's a guard? A couple of them chugging, go foil. Yeah, I mean, look, there's like this concept of the real politic. Okay, so we have this funding and we have to do this thing, and we're only going to have to we're going to have to negotiate with the DUP, and we're going to have to. The real politic thing really kills vision. You know what I mean? It kills having a vision, having a real good vision, because it sort of sets the parameters of your engagement before you start. And certainly, like our understanding of the EU funding stuff, I think, Robbie, you were asking, and I know, I mean, you'll know a lot of this. I think it was piece 3 at the time Girdwood was happening. We're piece 5 now, or piece 6, or jam piece, or I don't know what we're at now, you know what I mean? Every iteration of that every iteration of that funding is essentially meant to reinforce a human rights agenda, is meant to build a non-sectarian, integrated society on the principle of human rights. And you just have to look, I mean, we've done a research project called the State of Belfast map. We put all the data, it's all government data online. You just have to look at the state of Belfast today to understand how much of an epic failure that entire agenda has been. More deeply divided than we've ever been. Areas that are controlled, territory that's controlled, where paramilitary groups are still strong, that where racism and racist violence and sectarian violence is just part of the infrastructure. You know, if you move in there, you'll be intimidated, and that's the end of it. The carve up of that fund and how it's sort of drawn down into communities doesn't have as its ambition the delivery of equality. It has as ambition the maintenance of the community and voluntary sector that exists, which is already sort of sectarianised. And so the big funding that went in behind Mackey's, 44 million went in across the Greenway overall, and 11 million went in there. Imagine what 11 million can do for an area of extreme poverty like the Shankill and the Springfield Road. Imagine like a community like this sitting down and going, we've 11 million coming, lads. Want to do something with it? They definitely wouldn't have come up with a concrete path. They wouldn't have come up with that. Like, I mean, no matter how many workshops you've done to whittle it down, they wouldn't have come up with a concrete path. That's a different agenda at play there. And the funding and the peace funders are getting played. And that's how that money is arriving and landing on the ground. So I know that reflected out in Girdwood as well. I mean, if you want to give a sense of that, Liz.
Yeah, I mean, the council application for the Girdwood Hub was kind of dashed off with no expectation that it would actually succeed and get the money. In my understanding, piece 3 was about transforming space and creating shared spaces. But there were real concerns from the EU about the plan that they put forward for Girdwood. They were kind of given a deadline. The politicians were given a deadline, like sort these things out. One of them was the fact there was no community input in the plan. But they were awarded the funding with the idea that this hub would be a shared space and would be open to all. But then that, to me, that goes back to Section 75, which was meant to be the cornerstone of the peace process and its legislation. And that says, like, good relations cannot come before equality of opportunity. Like, you can't privilege shared space and good relations over giving people homes.
And I wanted to ask you, because we're going to wrap up in 5, I think, but maybe, no, we're not. Won't tell me, continue on. The Shepherd's Crook has not been pulled out yet, hold on. But like moving into maybe projecting forward a bit, you know what I mean? Because some of this sounds hopeless. Sometimes when you look at these things and you think of these barriers and you think of the politics of the north and all that stuff, you look globally. I mean, you look at what our comrades are suffering in Gaza and you go, we're talking about Girdwood, like, you know what I mean? Some activism and organising can be hopeless, but for me, there's a lot of hope in what has generated out of the north in independent community-led activism, and I just feel that it's tafrewahasig eglushik nangil, Brendan, you know what I mean? Like the na habre jane ethos that was imbued in us at school is something that we are fusing, and people are organically fusing into their activism in a load of realms today because they're bored with the political process as it stands, and they're bored with the bureaucracy, and they're then like prefiguratively bringing into life new concepts and institutions and ideas. And for me, that's the way we have evolved in PPR from Girdwood until now has really gone from that place of really hard learning through to imagining an entirely new society, a microcosm of which on the Mackie site, built through the vision of homeless families who are from the Shankill and from the Falls and from the Sudan, and who aren't shackled to the bureaucracy or the real politic of our political processes. For me, there's hope, massive hope in all that. And I was just want to ask you, what, like, you've came here, you've been walking about, you've probably done thousands of miles. Like, what gives you hope? What gives you solace? Could you have token decree in tonight, Sean?
Yeah, I do feel hopeful, and like at the end of the book, I had to go back and, I did this research a couple of years ago, and I had to go back and write kind of an epilogue, and a lot of that was thinking through, the fact that the assembly has failed so many times, and people are fed up with the status quo. I think within that political vacuum, as you say, I always was kind of in awe of the amount of organizing and just the brilliant work happening on the ground here when I lived here, and that continues, and that work continues, and it feels like there's a lot of momentum around it. The Belfast that I'm visiting today, there has a lot more in terms of, there's a lot still to go on, but has a lot more in terms of, equal marriage rights, bodily autonomy, Irish language. There have been movements forward. I think, I've never been an activist. I've always been a fly on the wall. That's why I do research, and I've always kind of been observant. But I feel like with this book and the opportunity I've had to work with PPR and to help kind of build some momentum around the legacy of Girdwood and the Mackie site, like, that gives me hope, and that I feel like to my son Sasta of and Seoladh, because I'm glad that the research that I did and the way that I did it is useful to the campaigns that are ongoing, because I think that way research and activism can kind of build off each other and work together.
And I know that I'm just realising I had a very important question to ask about 4 questions ago there that didn't do, so I know you wanted to say a bit. Like, we do have, we have all sorts of analysts analysing our peace process all the time. I mean, surely the story of the peace process here has been sold in a whole load of different places. Like, everywhere across the world is analysing. Often it has no real intimacy with the communities it's talking about. It's goldfish bowl stuff. It's not really talking to people and not listening to people. So you've come here and you've done research and you brought that back again. I wondered if you could tell us a wee bit about your struggles with that too in the academia, and then bringing this, like, trying to bring this out, credible research, but also then trying to disseminate as well. And what's the plans? Where we're going next? When are we doing it in the Dáil?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked me that, because there's a couple things there. I came here. I'm not from here, and I recognize that. When I did my research, I took from, I was looking at Hansard, I was looking at policy documents, but I really tried to immerse myself in what was happening in North Belfast to the very best of my ability, and meeting with people, listening to people, interviewing people. And I think research can be a really extractive business, particularly in places like the North that they're over-researched. People come here all the time. And, there can be this tradition of helicopter researchers who come in and they take their data, they do a couple interviews, they write up their papers, and they leave. And, that was never my intention, and I always really, I hope that came across in my work, that my intention was to really listen to people who maybe hadn't been asked what was happening in their areas. I'm still here. You guys can't get rid of me. I keep coming back, But it was really, really important to me to be genuine to the best of my ability about engaging with people working on the ground, because those are the people doing the work. I'm writing about it. I'm observing. But I wanted to give credit and justice to people that were doing that work. And I think, I'm proud of the book because I think it stands on its own because of the people that helped me and guided me and were a part of it on the ground. I do think in the academy, people can be quite self-congratulatory about community engagement and about this idea of participatory research and look at me, I talked to some people that are in North Belfast. I think there's a tradition of that in academia, and it's something that I try to avoid. And the other thing I wanted to say about that too is just navigate in academia. It's trying to bridge the gap between this ivory tower and what's actually happening in people's lives is really difficult. And this book is 76 quid without a discount. I can't afford my own book. I'm grateful that it was published. I'm really, really glad that it was published, and it's a brilliant press, and it's going to be out there for institutions and universities to buy. But I think that speaks too to how knowledge is disseminated in academia, and the fact that there's so much research done, and some of it's really good, rigorous research, but how are we getting people on the ground involved in accessing that research? It's a power structure, And so I was kind of having this identity crisis of how do I kind of get through these limitations of the price point of the book? The best I can do is I've given a copy to everybody that I interviewed, every community group that I worked with, on all sides, all neighborhoods, and donated a couple to PPR, the Cultural and people that have supported me, so that people can access it. I've also I've had a really nice time doing a series of blogs and podcasts and ways to disseminate the research in ways that are easy to access for people, and I think that's important. I hope to keep doing that. So that's kind of how I've grappled with that question of what does it mean to be an academic doing this kind of research? Because I don't necessarily class myself as an academic,
It's probably on some dodgy Russian website as a sheet.
I hope so. I hope it is. Everybody get a copy of it.
So 60 of them fell off the back of a lorry, I'd say. So, look, we're going to wrap up, folks. We have a brilliant lineup of events coming here. I want to say, first of all, thanks for writing the book. Thanks for sharing your knowledge. Thanks for listening to people. Thanks for listening. Thanks all of you for being involved in the discussion. If you want to support a campaign to build Belfast's first multicultural sustainable community in the area of greatest poverty and housing need in the state, there's a petition over there that you can sign for the Take Back the City campaign, and the organisers are at the back of the room. I'd be happy to talk to you. Gura míle maith agah, Glór na Mona.